right, please come on in, have a seat. Yeah, come on up. Ron, yes. Ron's going to stand at the podium. Yep.
Testing my mic. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, I just want you to know that we've been permission and encouragement to interrupt each other. So I just want to let you know that before we start. Okay.
Okie dokie. I really hate that. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. CMC connects people and ideas through community conversations at forums just like this every week. For our live stream audience just joining us, I am Deb Hackathorn, Government Relations Principal at Frost Brown Todd. I'm also proud to serve as CMC's chair of the CMC Board of Trustees. We're coming to you today from View Columbus in the Brewery District. Welcome, everyone. Each year, CMC is proud to celebrate inclusion and equity for the LGBTQ+ community through the annual Lynn Greer Forum. It's the Lynn Greer Legacy in Civic Engagement Fund that makes today's forum possible. Thank you, Lynn. We're all, yeah, please. We're also grateful to today's forum sponsors, Huckleberry House and Encova Insurance, and the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation. Thank you to our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch, and to our host, View Columbus. Yes, every CMC forum takes a village. Let's thank everyone for supporting today's program. Are LGBTQ+ rights losing ground? An erosion of such rights seems to be the latest casualty of America's deepening polarization. This afternoon, we take stock of the trajectory of LGBTQ+ rights and look at what the post-election environment may hold in store for LGBTQ+ Ohioans and their families. Please help me welcome today's distinguished panel. On my immediate right, the Honorable Nickie Antonio, Ohio State Senate Democrat leader. Karen Hewitt, founder and CEO of K. Hewitt Consulting and co-founder and COO of the Ohio Rest Collective. Cam Ogden, policy manager with Equality Ohio. Ken Schneck, editor of the Buckeye Flame. And our host, returning once again to CMC, the one and only Ronald Murray, Associate Director of Health Advocacy for Equitas Health and the Community Engagement Liaison for Stonewall Columbus. Ron, welcome back.
Y'all can keep going. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for having us here again this year. So let's get right rolling. So the topic is, are LGBTQ rights losing ground? So I'm going to start the panel with a simple question. Ground is different for different people. Everybody experienced the ground differently from the different intersections we exist in. What does the ground mean for you, and at what ground did we lose? Did we even have the ground? Who wants to start off with that one? Karen? You had nodded yes. Let's get it.
I was like, that's a great question.
Yeah, let's go.
For ground, I mean, I think the baseline is equal rights for everyone. And I think when we talk about losing ground, we have made strides getting towards that. And now, obviously, LGBTQ plus folks and specifically trans folks are really the target of what I like to think as a campaign. And it's not new in the playbook. You can substitute different demographics for that. But I also think that there is significant lack of education, miseducation, and then obviously disinformation. And I think social media plays a lot into that. But when we're thinking about the grounds, like it is more people that are willing to believe something they're told without necessarily understanding it. And then I think within the community, what that looks like is since the civil rights, we've been fighting for equal rights, and oftentimes a specific demographic is asked to pause or wait until they can, get these rights for these folks, and then we'll come back and get you. And unfortunately, that has happened over and over again, and then we've tried to go back and pick up folks, but the gap is bigger, right, at that point. So I think making sure that gap, like now, I think we can understand and look at it, but in the community, that means advocating for all of us and not just some of us.
Thank you. Anyone else want to take that?
We are always looking at the Buckeye Flame to expand the conception of what we believe ground to be in Ohio, and so our increased focus this year has been on rural Ohio. And we're here in Columbus. I drove down from Cleveland. Thank you for letting me in. And we are seeing more and more that LGBTQ issues are being raised in rural Ohio in some really inspiring ways, with more willingness to be out in these much more conservative red areas, but also a lot of city councils attempting to pass legislation to restrict the lived experience of LGBTQ plus rural Ohioans under the guise of, well, nobody's even going to notice. And so what we're seeing more and more are LGBTQ Ohioans in rural areas really using their voices and say, yeah, no, we're absolutely noticing what you're doing, and we want more attention to it, and we're going to push back. So it's been an amazing evolution just even over the past couple of years to see ground being expanded to not just be Cleveland and Columbus and Cincinnati, but to also include rural Ohio, where there's a lot of action taking place right now.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking from a public policy perspective, anti-LGBT legislation has been getting introduced in state legislatures across the country at an increasing rate across the entire country. And the legislation itself is primarily targeting youth, LGBT youth, trans youth. What we are seeing unfold, specifically in states that are controlled by Republican legislatures, is a generation-defining loss of ground, of safety, of security, and of health for LGBT youth. And it's really important to have this conversation now more than ever, because the question isn't just, are we losing ground? It's, what are we going to do about it?
So I have a different perspective. Because I have a different seat in the circle. And what I would say, I'm also the oldest person up here. And some of my perspective is informed by the lens that I look through going back a lot of years. So if I look at where is the LGBTQ plus community today from where it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, around the time I was coming out, believe it or not, 30 years ago, then I would say that the LGBTQ plus community has definitely gained ground when I look through that lens. What we're seeing a lot right now is a backlash of the fact that there's more LGBTQ folks that are visible. We're incorporated into the fabric of our communities in a way that we weren't even 10 years ago. I don't know right now that there's a person that we can find, I'm sure we can find someone somewhere who hasn't come across, connected with, had contact with someone from the LGBTQ community in their direct life experience. So we're more visible. We're gaining ground in terms of local communities and the rights for local communities, where local communities have said, okay, if the state's not going to do this, we're going to make sure that our community is a welcoming, open community. And I love what Ken said about the rural areas, because people in rural communities, it's a community. They take care of each other, look out for each other. When there's a storm or there's a crisis, everybody comes to the aid of everyone else. Doesn't matter what your family structure is, it matters whether or not you need help and if you've got a truck that's functioning and some gas in it that can get you there, right? And so I think the ground part of it, the ground game has changed. That's what I think. And these laws that are being proposed, this is same, they even use the same language, the public policy across the country. It's to garner a soundbite, a 30-second soundbite on an extreme news, supposed news station that's a national news station. It's for that. It's for touching base and using standing on the backs of people and punishing people and demonizing people as a way to put themselves forward, to say I'm the most conservative person in the room and here's my cred. And the other thing is the trying to divide the LGBTQ community. Look, in the 90s, I told you I'm old. When I was working with folks and we were first addressing HIV and AIDS, was the time I remember the community really being divided and people working very hard to divide us on the basis of health status, on the basis of race, on the basis of gender. And it was starting to be on the basis of gender identity. And at that time, it seemed to me a lot easier to divide and conquer the LGBT community. I believe that we are probably the strongest that I've ever seen us. And by the way, I'm a member of the LGBTQ community too, for those of you who don't know that. And so at this point, every time we've introduced the Fairness Act, from 2011 when I came to the legislature, we have refused to let anyone carve out any part of the LGBTQ community and just pass a bill that would just provide rights for certain members, but not all members. We have said it's all. We will continue to work until every single part of the community is included in receiving protections and equal rights. And we've stood strong through all of that. So it's challenging. The bombardment is coming every day, absolutely. I think the other new thing, and then I'll stop, is that in 2024, all of a sudden, mainstream America has discovered that actually children understand and are self-aware and understand at a very young age who they are. And they're sharing that with their parents, and they're sharing that with the people at school. This is a shocking revelation for a whole bunch of mainstream folks that had no idea. They really have been telling themselves that people don't figure out who they are until they're about 35 or something. So I think in the big scheme of things, while it's challenging and it's hard, I also believe that there's all kinds of ground that we have that we're standing on that's very solid as we continue the fight.
Well, I think our panel is done here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for that, Senator. So the next question I have, in all that, I heard a few things that kind of resounded to me. Backlash, I heard Karen said there's widen the gap. As much as we try to stick together, the goalpost keeps pushing out. And I also heard a thing about rural America, which actually said to me a little bit about intersectionality. How are intersectional identities within the LGBTQ community impacted differently by the legislation backlash? And is it backlash? Is it as one group? Is it almost like they're putting all the letters against each other? As one group gets more things, they force them on one another, like there's only one that can reach the goal. How is that affecting intersectionality members, people who are non-binary, trans, people of color? What does that look like for those who aren't able to hit that goal because they look differently or present differently, especially with the laws that are coming down?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the strategy of dividing the LGBT community, of just dividing communities in general, is nothing new to America. It's nothing new to the struggle for equality across the country. And hearing the perspective from Senator Antonio about the work in the 90s kind of reminds me of what I've seen in my research and what I saw post-Obergefell, right? As early as 2017, we know that Christian nationalist groups specifically targeted the T of the LGBT. In fact, they said, separate the T from the LGBT. And that wasn't just about trying to separate the trans people from the community, which obviously we are more united than ever in our struggle, but also to try and separate us in the public eye. And while, again, the community has remained very steadfast, and I feel more part of the community than ever before, there has been, I think, a significant backlash and targeted effort to separate the trans community on a public policy and public image lens, right? If you talk to people, especially at Pride events, I table a lot at Pride events, you talk to people about LGBT issues, they'll say something along the lines of, oh, I'm totally okay with loving whoever you want to love or all of this different stuff, but oh, those trans quote unquote issues, that's starting to really, pique my interest. And oftentimes when I'm talking to an individual, that's a learning moment. It's a time to talk about that. But with a legislator, there are other incentives, right? They need to win their primary. They need to get that Fox News clip, because I'll say it. They need to get the attention, and going after transgender people is a fantastic way to do that.
Which I think it's up to all of us to question that, because when did that become okay? When did it become okay? And I know for me, I have to practice this with my family. I have a family member who challenges me every day, especially now in election season, to have a conversation with him about things. But when did it become okay to build ourselves up by tearing down people who are so marginalized to begin with? And while again, I couldn't agree more that it's part of our culture, it seems like it's part of a societal norm, but I think we should always challenge that and not accept it as a norm. Not accept the fact, thank you, not accept the, thank you, not accept the fact that the way towards winning your primary is by tearing down the lives of innocent people who are just trying to live their lives and take care of their families. I think it's something I've been trying to talk more about, with my constituents and with the people, as people are running for office, to talk more about the common good. We need to get back to that. I feel like we've gotten separated from it as a country, as a nation, as a society. If we start embracing and thinking about the common good, how do we lift all boats together, that rising tide, how do we do that? Then that starts taking away the power from that being able to lift myself up if I tear you down.
I do want to add something to that as someone with multiple intersections. I think the first thing I would say is that there is like a soul level exhaustion with the repeat, literally the same playbook of what Black folks have seen, what Jewish folks have seen, like all of that. You can literally copy paste and just take out that term or that name of the group. And I think that's the first thing that I noticed. And so the call for community, I think, and mutual aid and care and just like general connection, we've been taught to do things individually. And the one thing I do see around intersectionality at this moment, you know, a lot of people don't care about stuff until it impacts them. That's really true. And the truth is, it's all actually connected. We are all connected. We've kind of forgotten how connected we are. And I think when we try to, you know, protect ourselves first, which is primal, I mean, it's a primal instinct, but when we try to protect ourselves first and don't realize how everything is connected, from climate to the most vulnerable of us, I think it's important to note that none of that makes us any better, because if a crisis happens, nobody knows about status for anyone. And so I think the need for community, and community that truly is, you know, tackling challenges and coming together to care for each other and solve issues and move in a way that's the way to counter that challenge with intersectionality, is to get in community and work towards building little communities until it surpasses the whole.
Agreed. I think some things I heard there too is the messages. How do we get those clear messages out? And one of the things that I know a lot of people are doing today is getting mixed messages via social media and the media. And specifically, since we have the Buckeye Frame editor, Ken, I have a question for you. How does media coverage influence public perception and advocacy around LGBT issues? And especially when it comes to countering disinformation?
Yes. This is where it is a challenge, right? We know that there's a dearth of coverage of LGBTQ plus issues in Ohio and nationally. We know that. We want to push even deeper and say, yep, and when LGBTQ plus issues are covered, they're done pretty badly. And so you see in the Cleveland area, a pride that happened in a Cleveland suburb where there were 2,000 pride goers and one protester. But if you read the article, you would think it was equal numbers, and they printed a picture of a pride goer yelling at the protester. And so you look at that and you think, oh, that poor protester. And that's not at all what happened. And we see that consistently. We see misgendering. We see dead naming. We see, there was an article a few weeks ago that said, now that the bathroom bill, the ban on trans individuals using bathrooms has passed in Ohio, will businesses be next? Well, that's a wonderful question, but also that bill has not passed. So we have actually, one of the roles that we've taken on is become a little bit of a media watchdog, because we have all these Google alerts set up. So we consistently reach out to media and say, no, it's not a ban on trans athletes, it's a ban on trans female athletes, and that's not the same thing. And every time we reach out to another outlet, they've changed it, and it's been wonderful. It's actually extraordinarily validating for what we do. But what we're seeing is that a lot of media are just backing off of LGBTQ coverage, period, because they don't feel perhaps that they have the education, sensitivity, and depth to cover issues that they might not understand. We're seeing the lack of intersectionality in the media sphere as much as we do in the LGBTQ plus community. When we talk about post-Obergefell, we also have to take our own accountability, which we see in the media, of, yeah, a lot of LGBTQ plus activism dropped off completely. Because in particular, white gay men asserted, well, we got it. We have full equality now because we can get married, and we're done. And funding dried up, and activism dried up, and energy dried up, and everyone else, the rest of the community, was saying, wait, there's still so much more we have to do. And so we saw that in the media lens as well, that a huge drop-off of covering LGBTQ plus issues post-marriage equality, because there's nothing left to do now. So we have to keep pushing back on that. We always encourage people to write letters to the editor of their local publication, but the problematic media coverage from, in particular, legacy newsrooms, it just continues, and it's pretty constant.
Thank you, Ken.
And this issue, I'm really glad you brought that up about bills passing. I can't tell you how many times I get emails, somebody will stop me and say, all those bills that passed. And I'm like, no. One bill passed. In the 13 years that I've been in the legislature, one bill passed. It passed this General Assembly, and it is not functioning in law right now. It is held up in the courts. There is an injunction on it. So it has not even gone into full effect because there's appeals on it. And so I think that's really, really important. Yes, a bunch of garbage has been introduced, but it has not passed. The state of Ohio has not passed a bunch of these laws. And I think that's incredibly important for people to understand and to correct the people around you as well. I really appreciate that you're doing that watchdog work with what, frankly, sometimes, I'm sorry, the media, they're just lazy. They're just lazy. They won't take the 2 minutes to go and fact check something. Fact checking is becoming rare. And so it's important for all of us. Everyone can do it. You can contact a reporter. You can email, so they always give the email, and tell them, no, I disagree, or no, you got that one wrong. And I think I encourage you all to do that.
Thank you. So we have 2 minutes left, and so I'm going to ask 2 questions and give you 2 each. 30 seconds. I heard Ken talk a little bit about people backing up their support, and it got me thinking about corporate support. Well, around 2020, had a lot of corporate support that were very pro-LGBTQ. Let's go, flags everywhere, not just in June. Then, and then June comes around, there's flags everywhere, and July 1, they're gone. What role do corporate allies play in advancing LGBT rights, and how has that changed in recent years? And how important is it for us to hold them accountable for what they said they were going to do and not doing it now? Yes, ma'am. What role did corporate allies play in advancing LGBTQ rights, and how has that changed in recent years?
Okay, so I think in the last, specifically last 8 to 12 months, you have seen people peeling back their DEI initiatives, possibly calling it something different. That is based on legal advice, to call it something different so that it doesn't get removed later by force as opposed to their will. So when you're looking at that corporate sector, they're changing it to social responsibility or putting those folks back in HR or whatever that looks like. But I think it is really important because 2020, we saw a lot of performative DEI statements and initiatives that either ran out of funding or ran out of steam. And so what we're seeing now is people protecting their organizations, their businesses, which is typically what we do, capitalism. So we do that, and then what does it look like to, be in the law and try? I mean, there's a lot. I worked in the corporate sector last year for a big company, and it was a lot of trying to be as nonpartisan as possible. But I think it's a matter of what are your values, what were they before 2020, and how do you put stake in the game for that now?
Yeah, I think it's also important to acknowledge how extremism and the rise of political extremism and political violence or politically motivated violence has been a real driving factor for these sorts of this sort of pulling back. So, for example, Target removing pride displays from specific rural Target locations because of people showing up and harassing and threatening their employees is not necessarily a reflection of the attitudes of the corporation, but so much as the incredibly visceral reaction that we are seeing from extremists, right? From people who are motivated by hate. And I can go on and name more, but if you even just go into online harassment, the list grows longer. I'm sure many people have seen how different ideas of sort of boycotts have been stirred up over faux outrage over specific things that were put out of proportion and caused companies to react in a way that protected their interests rather than our community, which is understandable given corporate motivations, but very, very disheartening to see.
I wrote about this last month, but I went to an FBI task force thing of where they had all these different seats, and here's the Jewish person. I got to be the gay person that day, but not the Jewish person, whatever. And they were going around the table and everyone was talking about the online harassment that they experienced. And I just kind of sat back and they were saying, oh, it's just so terrible to hear to have strangers and anonymous people online saying these things. 12 hours earlier, yeah, I had 100% been called a pedophile, a pervert, and just an evil person. The difference on X, formerly known as Twitter, the difference was the person calling me that was an Ohio State representative, right? So when we talk about extremism, we know it's not just, right? It's not just random people on the internet. We know it's enshrined in some of these areas that are electing their representatives.
Thank you. And my last question for you all is, if you had one thing to leave with the community in solidarity, what would you want everyone to take from this panel discussion? What's the takeaway?
Well, I'll start. There's an election coming up, no coincidence, and I think it's important to be an informed voter, to understand who it is that you're able to vote for, which representatives are up for you in where you live. There are also issues on the ballot. Issue 1, the difference between whether or not we have fair representation and fair districts, whether we can have a balanced conversation about LGBTQ equality, is going to depend on, do we have fair districts? Right now, the districts are so out of balance, artificially so. It is not reflective of the people of the state of Ohio. It is reflective of a power grab. And so if the people of the state of Ohio vote for fair districts, I'm voting yes on issue 1. And you can take it from there. If the people of Ohio say, once and for all, we want fair districts, it's a marathon, it's not going to be a sprint, but that will set things in line to be able to make some incremental long-term change that will really have positive outcomes for all of us in the state of Ohio.
Did you want to clap? I want to, all right, so I was like, please. I think the thing that I would say, which is a lot of the work that I do, is just getting people to connect with each other. And so, and put their walls down enough to not view each other as a threat, but view each other as a possible connection. And so in your own spheres, just notice how you're talking about trans folks. Notice how you're talking about people that are different or look different than you, and check yourself there. And we want to make sure that we're affirming. And I know folks in the LGBTQ community are tired. And so I would say for those that aren't, or those that are connected to someone, or maybe you're LGB, to check on those people, to speak up, and to get information and understand what the message is. Talk to trans people in your lives, research outlets, but get information so that you can be a little bit more educated on it, and that if I'm not in the room, you're still handling it. because that's huge right now, and how we talk about it in our families, at those, holiday dinners or whatever, that's really important. So make sure you're getting information, researching, and connecting with each other.
To all of the trans youth that watch the Columbus Metropolitan Club's live stream, but to those who are the most targeted and most impacted by this backlash that we find ourselves in, I want you to know that we've been here before as a community. It feels new to you, feels pretty new to me, but we've been here before. In 2004, it wasn't just Ohio that passed a constitutional amendment banning marriage equality, right? It happened across the country. And when I look for precedents of the moment we find ourselves in, I have to cast all the way back to 2004. And speaking of precedents, in the aftermath of that, in Ohio and across the country, determined activists came together and founded organizations. And it was in the aftermath of that Equality Ohio was founded. We've been here before, and we can meet this moment. And again, to the young people watching this, there are generations of people who've overcome this who are rooting for you right now.
I am so happy that you brought that up. In 2004, that was all about getting George Bush elected. That's what that was about. That was the only reason that was on the ballot. And that was part of my motivation to run for office in 2005 for city council and become the first LGBT person to get elected to city council in Lakewood and start the whole thing from there. I thought, well, get mad or get elected. I decided to get elected.
I love talking about 2004 too, because there was only one pro-LGBTQ ordinance passed in the country in 2004, and it was in Cincinnati. And it took a heroic effort for that community to come together and get protections back that had been taken away from them by a popular vote in 1992. There is not an LGBTQ plus organization in the state of Ohio that doesn't need your support. And they're all, as opposed to other states where there's a lot of organizations that are overlapping with each other, I actually see the LGBTQ plus organizations in Ohio much more X-many of having their own little superpowers and working together, but really carving out their own niche. And so if you're supporting one LGBTQ plus organization, try to add another one into the mix if you are not currently supporting each other. And that really does mean showing up, whether that's showing up in your corporate spaces, showing up, sharing information on social media, showing up with your wallet, whatever that might be. Try to add another LGBTQ plus organization in the mix, because there's not one in the state of Ohio that doesn't need more support.
And the final thing is, there is not a closet big enough for all of us to go back into. We are not going anyway, so much to the chagrin of all the people that would like to see us go there. So and for all of you, all those young people, I love that, that are watching, and I hope some are. There isn't a closet, we're not going back, and there's a world of support for every single person from the LGBTQ community. You just need to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, in our tradition, we're going to take audience from the questions from the audience. Doug?
Ron, thank you very much, and thank you to today's panelists. I know some of you in the room have questions for today's awesome panelists, so please do join me here at the microphone. If you are watching on our live stream audience, or you're in Sophia Pfiffner's class, please do type your questions into the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. Great questions at CMC have two things in common, don't they? Yes, they take about 30 seconds to ask, and what punctuation mark does a question end in? A question mark. These are repeat guests here. Thank you. I'll start us off with this question. Cam, can you speak more to how anti-LGBTQ fear has been deliberately manufactured?
Yeah, well, you guys might have noticed if you've turned on the TV that there's a Senate race going on right now. And to the tune of, I believe according to the New York Times, it was $37 million. There has been an enormous investment in advertisements demonizing the trans community, right? This election will come and go, regardless of what the outcome is, but the prejudices and misinformation that is being spread and inflamed by this investment will remain. And that's going to be a problem for our community. That story has been told over and over again. I mean, we're seeing that investment in swing states. We're seeing that investment where we saw that investment in 2022. The deliberate decision to look at the data of how prejudice against LGBT people has been causing our community to suffer and then still put more money on the table because it wins elections is just completely pathetic and cowardly. And it is such a fantastic, or well, such a grotesque example of what level some people are willing to stoop in search of power.
Hello, I'm Shauna Davis. I'm here unofficially but officially on behalf of the Black Theater Coalition in Columbus. And I had a question about, as a newer group of younger people, what I'm finding is when it comes to having conversations with people, there's a lot of tone policing and a lot of, even if we come with our best, we have this stuff, we are, completely, how do you deal with that as a representative from a marginalized community speaking to the majority?
You give a little bit more specific of an example of when that's happened or you felt like?
Yes, thank you. So for example, my group has had several conversations with multiple theater companies in the area about maybe instituting policy and becoming an ally with them so that we can provide, information, resources. And I think when people get called out about anything, again, their walls go up. But then, our walls go up. So it's like less of a conversation and more of a ciphering through semantics when at the end of the day, policy change. I honestly, I don't care what your feelings are, to be honest, and you don't care what my feelings are, but what can we put into paper so that in the future, this doesn't happen again?
I really appreciate that specificity. Thank you. I do a lot of work and I do a lot of work with theater. I've seen you before. So, I think, especially in that community, what I always say is leadership, transition, anything is an inside job, okay? And so this is me to you right now. And I'm saying this to you because I gotta get me right? And then I go. And so I do need you, and I'm gonna push back just a little bit, I do need you to care about how they feel because I need you to connect with them on a very human level. And then there may be some understanding, and then there may not. Like there may be some people where you're like, okay, I gotta move on. It's an invitation. It's always an invitation to connect, always an invitation to do better as a human race. It's always an invitation. Now, whether they take it or not, I gotta move on. I have things to do, right? So my hope for you is that you will start to do that. Call me too, because I can get you with some connections with the community that might ally up there. But, I just make sure, and then, get your message, mission, values, all like that, vision aligned with your group. And I love grassroots organizing, and I think that is like really the way. And a lot of those principles hold true still. And so however you can do that within your group, do it.
Thank you.
So I was just gonna add, is that, like I have to talk to people that we're on different ends of the spectrum with it, on a lot of issues. And the first step is being willing to sit together at the table, walk through the door, sit down, and be at the table. And then the next step usually is, can we find that, maybe it's just a tiny little kernel of commonality, something we agree on, and we start from there. A lot of times the people that I deal with, we're never going to agree on these issues out here on the margins, but we find that one thing, and that's the thing we agree to work on together, and that's where we start. And a lot of times it's led to being able to expand, but it takes a whole lot of time. and getting to know each other, because then we build trust. Because if there isn't any trust, there's nowhere to go with that. So that's my thought.
I do have one more thought for that. You were talking about calling out. And so calling out, calling in, calling out, that gets tricky. And I'm personally the type of person that I'm only going to call someone out. And I mean, rarely, but I'm going to reach out to you directly to try and, get some resolution, maybe even some sort of mediator, a third party, that can be helpful if you're having a conversation about, people's feelings, people's rights, people's access, right? Like you want to make sure that maybe there might need to be a third party there. So be mindful as you're calling out, because normally calling out is not trying to get connection or repair. Normally calling out is trying to say, you've ignored me, and now I'm going to, say it loudly so that everybody can see what's going on. But with calling in, I really think that is an invitation also to connection.
Is this thing on? Okay. One last thing. Yes to everything that's been said. The other piece is, I'm going to acknowledge your frustration because it's difficult. It's frustrating, it pisses you off, it makes you angry. I think all of us on the panel can say we've been there, we've been the first one. Sometimes you are the first one that has to institute change, and it's hard. And oftentimes they see the messenger instead of the message because they see the behavior and not the purpose of the behavior. That's a social worker me talking. Hey, Amanda. Just FYI, Amanda was my first social worker boss when I first got my license, just FYI. But understanding that sometimes you want to change the messenger, meaning you want to change how your effect is to get that message across. And understand it's frustrating, it's difficult, we've all been there. What you're talking about is a cultural change, changing how you think about certain people, certain groups, and it's exhausting. And sometimes it's not fair. But when you're called upon to be the first one, that's your charge to do it. You have to figure out how to get that message across to that community, because the people behind you are going to appreciate the door you knock down for them. Okay?
Thank you.
I think early answered.
Here's a question from the live stream. The panel briefly spoke about Dylan Mulvaney's experience with a Budweiser partnership. How can we challenge them, companies, not to pull back from the support of their employees?
Jeez. When the president of your board looks at you like that, you answer. So, unsurprisingly, companies that have LGBTQ plus ERGs, employee resource groups, do better, right? And so that's one place that we want to see more and more of those. By the way, do better in all areas. Retention of LGBTQ plus issues, celebration, policies that exist within the corporation for all individuals. And so there are still a lot of corporations here in Ohio that don't have LGBTQ plus employee resource groups. So if you see an opportunity to advocate for that, I think it's really important to do that. They make a huge difference, and they actually do ultimately save the corporations money, and I'm told they like that. That said, this conversation about boycotting companies and where we support, all of that takes knowledge. And so it's really important that we at least know when we are consuming what is that company's track record, right? So the Human Rights Campaign does a pretty darn good job at tracking here are the different ratings for different companies. I would only push back in that, oh, okay, well, they were at Pride, they must be supportive. Okay, right, and they're giving out really great stuff, and as a nonprofit who's next to that table, it's really difficult when they're giving out iPhones and they're coming to our table like, what do you have? I'm like, the truth, and nobody wants it. And so, I think it's a wonderful thing, but you also have to place it in the context that a lot of these corporations are spending more money on the t-shirts for their employees to march in Pride than is our operating budget for a month, bar none. As opposed to when you see some of these corporations participating, up in Cleveland, we have an amazing, and I'm sure there's one here too, LGBTQ plus resource fair, where these corporations are showing up and saying, here are the jobs we have to offer. Cool, bring that to Pride. Right? So we just want to push back on the idea of visibility means support, because that is not always the case with corporate America.
One more thing. after coming out of a year in the corporate sector. We're still unpacking that. Thanks, therapist. So I think the main thing about that is like, not only is there visibility, not only do they have an ERG group, how much funding, but like, do they have visibility and representation for LGBTQ plus people that isn't just about being LGBTQ plus? That's a big indicator if there's a little bit more progression and advancement there. So that's a thought.
Thank you. We've got 4 minutes left, so let's try to get to 2 final questions.
First of all, thank you for the work you're doing in behalf of our community in your various ways. I'm interested in that work, what your perspective is about the significance of religious convictions in the topic of the day, and the role of houses of worship also.
That last part, what was that last part about? Oh,
Role of
gotcha.
house of worship. I guess everybody looking at me. I'll say my younger brother's a pastor, and he goes to Pride with me. My mother was a pastor. My father's a deacon. I think the role of church and religion, for me as a raised Pentecostal, Church of God of Christ, and all those things there, faith and spirituality is important in my life, and also it's important in who I am. And culturally, church has always, the house of worship has always been a space that we went to for refuge. And it's for some of us, we have that trauma that prevents that from happening. We've been demonized for our life and who we are and who we were born to be. And I think that there's this dichotomy shift about if you're going to be authentically who you are and how you worship, and you've got to make a choice. There should be no choice there. A lot of us suffer from church trauma. Is that what it's called? Church trauma, church hurt. Because I'm a PK. I was blessed I didn't have to. I've always been who I was as a kid. Growing up, they knew I knew what I was going to be when I was in kindergarten, thankfully. But I think that experience I experienced is different. I think that even when we're at Pride and I see the church individuals protesting against us, and I'm going to hell, these things at a bullhorn in my ear, that's not the God that I was raised to serve, and that's not the God I experienced. I think that even Adam H. Board has a faith and religion conference every year, and I was asked to speak to about LGBTQ and faith, and I was amazed that there were individuals from all faiths there, Muslim, Jewish, and things there, understanding that there is a space for all of us in their house of worship and the faith there, and then I think the church is moving to that. I don't believe that shutting those doors to individuals who are looking for whatever their faith base is, or faith of worship, or faith of solitude is appropriate. That's my answer to that.
Say also as a PK that having your convictions, having your religion, I support that. I want you to have faith. I think it's a non-academic barrier in the education world. It is something that can help you in your ACE score. There's lots of things that the church can do in your upbringing and for you. What I will say is when we bring it into now I'm going to make other people follow my constriction or convictions, that's the problem. And that's the problem that we're seeing, especially with the increase of the voice and amplification of, nationalists, Christian nationalists. And there's documentaries and lots of things around the reasons why churches are tax exempt, all those kinds of things. But I think I say fully dive into whatever faith makes sense for you, but then don't make that everyone else's conviction and choice.
We were a nation that was built on the principles of a separation of church and state. It's not an old-fashioned idea. It's always relevant. We do not have a national religion. There is not a national faith practice. And as someone who was raised in a Christian faith, the kind of white nationalist Christianity that many of us, especially folks in the LGBTQ community, are being attacked with is not a Christianity that I even recognize. And so I think it's really important. I love what you said. The part that religion plays in each person's own personal faith practice should not enter into our policies are public policies, and they certainly shouldn't enter into the punishment of people for being their authentic selves.
Thank you, thank you. So I wish we had more time for questions. So we're going to wrap it up, and I'm going to turn it over to Deb. Thank you.
Okay. I hope you all are going to take away a few nuggets of advice and some inspiration from today's forum. We do want to, again, thank our wonderful supporter for this forum and forums like it, Lynn Greer with the Lynn Greer Legacy and Civic Engagement Fund, and also Huckleberry House and Encova Insurance for sponsoring today's forum. Thanks so much to View Columbus for hosting us today, and to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for supporting today's live stream. And a very special thank you quickly to today's very passionate panelists, Senator Nickie Antonio, Karen Hewitt, Cam Ogden, Ken Schneck, and our host, Ron Murray. And since the senator hinted at it, please join us right here at View Columbus next Wednesday at 11:30 for our next forum, which is, Does Ohio Need Gerrymandering Reform? Thank you again, everyone. We could not do this without you. Please stay with us, enjoy food and beverages. The bar will be open until 6. Have a great evening.